going to spread and how long this whole shutdown process would be. So we looked for temporary fixes. We talked with Schumer's office, and they thought something kind of short term, and just to make sure that people got back to their jobs was important. None of us, not us, not the White House at the time, not doctors had any idea how long and how awful this pandemic would be. But that, at the time was writing a real short bill or short-sighted bill in terms of understanding what the pandemic was about. So while it was important, it did lack a lot of subsequent fixes that we really needed to address. But one thing that we were really central in, and you'll be hearing from Michelle in a bit, but Michelle and I were on the phone from the Railroad Retirement Board, every other day, talking with the subcommittee who was writing this really tough language to get inserted to make sure that railroaders' unemployment insurance was married with the broader state-based unemployment insurance. And it was, and Michelle can talk about it in a few minutes, but that was a tough thing to do in the first place. And to get it all done in under 2 weeks and make sure there weren't, legislative errors, it was a tough go. So that led us into kind of a scramble. We were told fairly quickly from Amtrak, this money isn't going to last very long, and we're going to be facing some big furloughs. The date kind of got extended and moved around a bunch, but the hard deadline ended up being, October 1st of 2020. So in the meantime, during that summer and that fall, we were out there banging doors, via Zoom, beating down Congress's doors to try to get some additional funding. But if you guys recall, there was a lot of political stalemates up on Capitol Hill. It was tough to get anything passed. The House would pass a big bill here, and the Senate would just sit on it and say, oh, it's too big, or, oh, it doesn't address the underlying issues, et cetera, et cetera. So nothing really happened. But in the meantime, as you can see on your screen, President Maratea testified in September before the Railroad Subcommittee alongside Amtrak CEO Flynn, calling for immediate relief to Amtrak in order to keep the service running and to keep our people employed. We also followed that up with National Day of Action rallies around the country. Many of the people on this call were in attendance at one of those at some point. I see Mr. Shanahan's out there. You can see him holding up a sign in Chicago. Jack was out there in LA, and Billy was speaking and yelling right in front of the Capitol. And we had a lot of members of Congress join us. The Rail Passengers Association joined us, all in an effort to try to get Amtrak funding included in this bill. So, unfortunately, October 1st came and passed, and basically Congress was in a stalemate in a lot of respects. They, had the election going on. It was just politically impossible to get things done. That said, December 27th finally rolled around, and we got this $900 billion omnibus bill. It included $600 checks, extensions of the expansion of RUI, $14 billion for transit, $3 billion for Amtrak. And we were at least able, we got some pushback from Republicans about making it actually retroactive back to October 1st to get Amtrak folks back to work. But we got no further furloughs or reduction in long distance service. And the transit folks got some important language in there to ensure that that funding flowed down to people, to payrolls, and making sure furloughs were not part of the transit apparatus either. But the gist of this politically was, if you remember the Georgia elections, Republicans were trying to front run Democrats on getting something done. They saw, the promise of checks, as a political liability. So McConnell was, finally, after he had said no to $600 billion weeks prior to that, he agreed to $900 billion bill with checks included. Which brings us to the American Rescue Plan. Sorry, trying to make sure my slides are in the right order here. $1,400 stimulus checks. This was a huge win for a lot of folks. Had the income requirements, the dramatic expansion of the child tax credit from 2,000 to 3,600 per child. They up the age to 17. It's now fully refundable. So no matter how much money you actually make, you will get that funding. And it'll be in advance payments, meaning they're going to be spreading those out over the I think resulting next few quarters. Another thing that was included was COBRA subsidies for employers to make sure that people during a pandemic don't go without health insurance. These things were really important. A lot of the stuff that we saw coming out in terms of criticism was, that there's a lot of pork in this bill. And to be honest, there wasn't much pork, if anything, in this bill. There was just a lot of money that needed to be spent. This is a very good outline of where all that funding went. The critics of the bill don't really want to talk about where it all went because it's all going to things that they like. We saw a lot of critics of the bill after it passed start talking about how great certain provisions are of it, but meanwhile, none of them voted for it. It brings us to the TCU specific parts of the rescue plan. Railroad unemployment insurance, we got that expansion bulked back up to $600 biweekly supplemental benefits. We have that extended now through Labor Day. Obviously for non-RLA properties on the call, it's the same. We have parity for state-based UI as well, and funding for RRB operations, which I think John and Michelle will get into in a moment. $30.5 billion for transits. Again, a big requirement not to furlough in order to receive that funding. The employer has to certify to the Federal Transit Administration that they have no people furloughed. So that's a note to all our transit reps, our commuter reps out there, and local chairmen. If you got people out on furlough, I want to know about it. We just had an issue that we hope to be solved in the next 24, 48 hours, where Caltrain out in California had no idea. Their lobbyists apparently didn't even tell them that they had this self-certification requirement in order to get the funding. Well, that's now fixed, and we're going to get 8 Carmen back just because of that. So please, if you have a problem with furloughs, please let us know. Get that to me. I will hound down the right people to make sure that everyone is being held accountable. Moving on, we got $1.7 billion for Amtrak. This was actually quite interesting. We were only expecting about 1.5, and then during the negotiations over the bill, there was $200 million they had to get nixed from somewhere else because of Senate rules, and Leader Schumer decided to give it to Amtrak, which is always appreciated because Amtrak, as we all know, is notoriously underfunded. That was a huge thing for us. But the biggest thing, obviously, was the requirement to recall all our furloughed folks. That, I understand, obviously, is a little bit of a slower process than we like at the moment. Hopefully, some kicking in the pants from our friends at the FRA to Amtrak is going to shake some trees there, but we'll see. The other thing was actually, obviously, a restoration of long distance service that had been drawn down to 3 days a week. Now it's all the way back to daily. So on that note, I'm going to pause there and kick it over to Member Bragg and Ms. Neuendorf from the Railroad Retirement Board. They're going to go a little bit more into detail about the RUI provisions and some of the funding that was secured in the big bill.
Right.
Stop sharing. Hold on. There we go.
All right, Dave, thank you so much. Artie, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and address you all today. I do see a lot of friends and a lot of familiar faces from my Section 3 days. I often miss those now sometimes. So, but it's great to see everyone. And I want to begin by recognizing the work that rail labor did, and specifically TCU, in ensuring that railroaders were not left behind when it came to COVID relief. I cannot say enough good things about Dave and what he does and his dedication, and he's always on top of pretty much everything, and it's nice knowing that there are people like him there. So as you all know, Congress took action in order to help unemployed Americans through the pandemic. And it was the advocacy of your union that assured that railroaders received parity with state unemployment benefits. Now, I know that the most recent legislation is the ARPA, or the American Rescue Plan, but the benefits that railroaders got in that legislation were essentially extended and were established in earlier legislation. So I'll just go through those briefly. Just through the three main laws that were passed and how they affected, railroad benefits. So the first was the CARES Act, and that was passed at the end of March 2020, and provided three benefits for railroaders, as well as funding for us to pay for these benefits. Although regular benefits were still subject to sequestration, none of the new benefits were subject to it. So I'll touch on some of those benefits. And the first was the extended benefits. The CARES Act granted an extra 65 days, which translates to 13 weeks of extended benefits that were set to expire on December 31st of 2020. Now, the enhanced benefits was a $1,200 recovery benefit to any qualified employees starting on April 1st and ending on July 31st of 2020. And this $1,200 benefit was per 2-week registration period. And lastly, in the CARES Act was the waiver of the 7-day waiting period. So there is a 7-day waiting period for benefits under RUIA that was waived. And this applied to both unemployment and sickness benefits, and was set to expire on December 31st, 2020. This was the only benefit that applied to, or only provision that applied to both unemployment and sickness. So now we'll move on to the CARWA, or the Continued Assistance to Rail Workers Act of 2020. Since some of the benefits of the CARES Act were set to expire on December 31st, at the end of December, Congress passed, legislation, and I'll just use the acronym CARWA, which essentially extended the benefits created by the CARES Act. CARWA provided for extended unemployment benefits, an enhanced benefit, and waiver of the 7-day waiting period. So under this legislation, the enhanced benefits were reduced to $600 per 2-week registration period rather than the $1,200. And all of those benefits were set to expire on March 14th, 2021. The big change that we saw under CARWA was that it granted prospective temporary relief from sequestration for the duration of the presidential declaration of emergency related to COVID-19. So as a result, beginning 10 days from enactment of the law through 30 days after the date on which the presidential declaration of emergency for COVID terminates, railroad employees no longer have their regular unemployment and sickness benefits reduced for sequestration. So again, we're running down to the last minute. Congress decided to act and pass the the ARPA, and that's the American Rescue Plan Act in March of 2021. And again, it extended the benefits that were previously created. So under ARPA, there is an extended unemployment benefit and enhanced benefit of $600 per 2-week registration period again, and waiver of the 7-day waiting period. Now, this time the benefits will only go until September 6th of 2021. In addition, ARPA provides that up to $10,200 in unemployment benefits may be exempt from income tax. Although we don't administer this provision, the IRS does, and it will have a big impact on our beneficiaries. And also, as you may know, the RRB budget has remained flat for several years. And now, as a result, agency resources have been limited. The increase in unemployment sickness applications and claims during the pandemic have strained those limited resources, and customer service has truly suffered as a result. ARPA provided a much needed supplemental appropriation for the agency's administrative budget. ARPA appropriated the remaining amount needed for the RRB's multi-year IT modernization plan, which will eventually provide more online services to railroaders and their families. And as an example, like right now, railroaders cannot file a sickness application online, which has meant that employees suffering from COVID have to either mail or fax their applications in. Modernizing the system has been a top priority of the agency, and the ARPA funding means that we will be able to accomplish that goal sooner. And hopefully, at some point, we'll be able to file these applications online and not have to go through the antiquated process of mailing them in and faxing them in. Also, ARPA appropriated $6.8 million for agency hiring related to the pandemic for the next 2 years. We are in the process right now of hiring staff in our field service, as well as in the unit and headquarters that handles sickness and unemployment applications. And we are hoping that these additional hires will help improve the customer service. I know, and as well as everyone else does, that this has definitely been a challenging time for the railroad community. As an agency, we're striving every day to help those who are in need. We always appreciate your patience, and we do appreciate the work that you guys do to make sure that unemployed railroad workers get the benefits that they deserve, and that the agency has the resources that it needs to provide those benefits. So again, I do thank you for everything, Artie, Dave, and the entire legislative team. Without you guys, it would have been much more difficult to get the things that we did. So, I do have Michelle on here with me. I wanted to recognize her. And as you all know, I have an incredible staff. They are just top notch. They work very closely with the employees, with the members, and with labor, to help out as much as we can. So, and also Michelle is here to take the hard questions. So, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them now, and Michelle can chime in at any time.
We're gonna pause there and yeah, go to questions. If you guys have any questions, please unmute, raise your hand, whatever, make yourself known via Zoom pathways for either John or Michelle.
Hey, Dave, before anybody asks any questions, I wanted to thank Michelle personally. We had a lot of conversations when Amtrak was looking to furlough everybody, where she was my provider of information that helped us make our case, why financially it wasn't appearing, the savings that they claimed they weren't really getting due to other costs involved in the increase in the unemployment insurance rate, among other things. But I just want to say thank you, Michelle. I know I kept you on a lot longer than you wanted to be on, but you came through.
No, thank you. My pleasure. It's absolutely my pleasure to help in any way I can. You definitely asked me questions that were a challenge, but you were patient with me. Being I had to do some research on some of the things you wanted to know, and you were patient in getting that information. So always happy to help.
Again.
Any questions? You guys want to unmute yourself if you have any? Ratchford, how do I? There you go. Mark, you unmuted?
Yeah. I do have a couple questions. How, with the current legislation that was just passed, with the funding that's allocated for supplementing the state's losses moving forward, I guess the first question, is it my understanding that that money goes through 2024? And then my second question is, how specifically is that money allocated for each state? And is there any particular provision within the legislation that ties that more toward retaining employees, or is it more discretionary as far as exactly how the states want to utilize it, whether it's for labor costs or for infrastructure?
Thanks, Mark. Well, I'll jump in and answer that. I was meant for this time to be for RRB questions, but we'll jump into. I'm assuming, Mark, you're talking about Amtrak funding in particular, correct?
Correct, but it could be really for any relative to anybody. But yes,
the money that's appropriated is following usual for state supported in particular. It's following the traditional 209 state supported formulas. They are kind of being forced to pass it down to the state supported routes. So it does really actually flow down as well. And then it's actually, I believe, good for the life of until expended. There's not a cutoff date for the funding. So I hope that answers it. As to how long it should last, man, that's anybody's guess. How long is COVID going to be bad? How long is ridership going to be bad? So it's all, trying to supplement losses and operating losses on each individual carrier, right? So that's kind of what it's going towards. Anything else? All right, I guess we'll thank you, Member Bragg and Michelle. Really appreciate everything you guys do. And I'll just echo Billy's earlier comments about Michelle just being an absolute wealth of information in all things RRB, literally like the most insanely small tax issue or how to calculate something. It was really, really helpful for Willie and I when we were trying to make an argument against or argument for Amtrak funding. So thanks again, guys.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
All right, we'll jump back into our regularly scheduled program here. So wanted to just jump in right back in, kind of do a full recap of the total funding that's going towards the programs, the two major programs, or federal funding programs that we care about. Transit total and during COVID times, almost $70 billion is going towards it. Also making sure that there's no furloughs or that the employers, again, have to self-certify. And on the Amtrak side, we're getting 5.7 billion total, 1 year after COVID began. It's 1 year to this date, really. That 5.7 billion, and you Amtrak folks know that's a massive amount of funding in the Amtrak world. We've been scraping by, hopefully getting 2 in years past. So this extra more than doubling of funding has really helped us. I don't know why that did that. So again, I do want to make a note about how the American Rescue Plan passed. Sadly, we're in a very, very divided time in politics, and parties are really loath to give each other wins in a lot of respects. Now, I will say in the last Congress, Democrats voted for a lot of the Republican bills because they thought it was good policy, because it was the right thing to do to get money into the hands of people, money into the hands of our employers, the organizations that represent our folks. This one, not so much. Republicans don't feel the same way about it as we do, or as the Democrats do about them. When the script is flipped, not a single Republican voted for the American Rescue Plan. It's sad, but that's kind of where we're at. That also shows you who's actually delivering for us. This is President Biden and House and Senate Democrats stepping up, delivering a win for us, for the American people, for transit, for Amtrak, for rail. I mean, it's big. So coming up, I know you heard Greg mention earlier, it's actually been announced today, this morning. We got some initial literature about it. It's their big infrastructure bill. They call it the American Jobs Plan. As Greg mentioned, there is a proposal for $80 billion to expand passenger and freight rail service. 80. That's a lot. That would absolutely do wonders in the passenger rail world, and that's the kind of expansion of our industry that we need in order to see real job growth. And as well on the commuter side, another 80 billion is going to be going towards public transit. Ostensibly, commuter rail is going to be included in that, building out stations, building out rail cars, which our machinist brothers and sisters build here in America. I mean, these are really good job creating programs and initiatives. And also 48 billion in workforce development and workforce protection. Now, I briefly read through that section. They're talking about everything under the DOL for our training services department, to literally talking about what I'm going to talk about in a minute, the PRO Act, and expanding bargaining rights for workers in this country to make it easier to join a union, easier to get a contract, et cetera, et cetera. They're lumping that all into one because, to be honest, they are kind of one and the same, worrying about people's access to work and to a quality wage, quality health care, et cetera. I just like how they're looking at that a little bit differently. In Congress, Democrats are actually currently, at least in the House, they are working on the Surface Transportation Reauth. That's the big FAST Act. That's the major policy side of our world. So, getting the FRA to do certain things, getting Amtrak to change its underlying policies, maybe blowing up the Amtrak board and getting a labor member on there, or mandating that a labor member gets on there. Those are things that we have that passed the House last summer, but obviously never got brought up in the Senate. Democrats are going to make another try at that. We don't know where that's all going to go with the nature of the filibuster these days and everything having to be related to spending. But it's just kind of the sad nature of things. It's the party of no versus the party of trying to do things. Which brings me to the PRO Act. You heard Greg mention that. I don't know if you guys have followed this at all. This is the big rewrite of U.S. labor law, and why do we need this in the first place? As we all know, union membership has been declining in this country, and as that's been declining, so has economic inequality has completely increased, almost exactly in correlation. In addition, amongst non-union workers, half of them want to join a union, but yet when you look at actually who's represented, only 11%. That is a huge, huge gap in people that want representation, want what we have, but they can't get it. And we all know why. It's hard to organize. The companies throw everything in the kitchen sink at you to try to stop you and dissuade you from organizing. I mean, we're seeing it publicly right now with Amazon. I mean, for first time in a long time, you know, we have a president who's gone out there and publicly sided with workers trying to organize at a company. I mean, he didn't directly say Amazon, but he said Alabama. This is kind of the big one. But here's what the PRO Act would do for us. It, you know, eliminates the right to work / freeload, you know, makes it way easier to organize, just making little things like trying to get access to employee roles, et cetera. I mean, you guys as union reps, you've been out there in the field just trying to get to talk to our existing membership is hard enough. Imagine trying to, you know, talk to a non-represented workforce. Makes it easier to picket, expands the right to strike. You can do sister strikes as well. It actually punishes employers for violating employee rights, and it punishes them for failing to bargain. This is one of the biggest parts, but underappreciated parts of the PRO Act. A lot of people don't know that, you know, even when employees are successful in organizing a bargaining unit, the company can just drag their feet. They can just drag their feet forever and ever. And this is, again, under NLRA world. And they'll just run out the clock until they can decertify the union. There's nothing forcing them to the table. This would apply penalties and a fine structure. I mean, this is huge. This would be the first big rewrite of labor law since the 1930s. And when was the last time we were strongest? I mean, 30s, 40s, 50s. That was the peak of labor representation in this country, around 35, 36, 37%. We're down to 11 at the moment. This is something that I wanted to throw up on screen for you guys, just to kind of show you how people talk on Capitol Hill.
Hey, Dave,
yeah.
can I just jump in a minute because brothers and sisters, Dave and I went to the debate for the PRO Act, and it was like my first foray into actually listening to these politicians going back and forth. And I can't tell you how angry I got. I wanted to jump. Dave was holding me from jumping over the railing and wanting to pound these guys. Just, you know, it's up on your screen. Just take a look at the difference between how a Democrat talks about unions and how a Republican. And we could have put 20 and 20 on each side, but we just gave you a couple. I know a couple of them will be from, you know, somebody that it's your state, but just take a look at this. Look at William Timmons from South Carolina. By invalidate those laws, forcing workers to pay union dues to keep their jobs. It's a gross overreach. It's another example of a flagrant power grab. It's pro shadiness. It's pro unemployment. It's not pro worker. And you listen to the other side. I'm a member of the IBW for over 40 years and a lifelong labor leader. I saw firsthand workers being unjustly fired. I mean, this you can't see two different sides looking at the same thing. And this is what me and Dave are up against when we knock on a Republican door or a Democrat door. And now that we have all three houses, we fully intend on taking advantage as much as we can. But this is where your vote makes a difference. Forget the ideological stuff. This is where your vote makes a difference, when they're willing to step up and help out unions. And the PRO Act is huge for us. All right, Dave, sorry. I had a rant.
No, that was great, Billy. I remember that well, when we were, you know, one of very few people in the House gallery watching that. It was us, and there was a big group of steel workers up next to us. And I remember the steelworkers getting escorted out because they kept booing the Republicans. It was pretty hilarious. Good times. So jumping back in, wanted to kind of move over to what it is we all do and how this is kind of structured. How do we get things done here? There's three parts of this stool, kind of like the retirement stool you've seen in the past, but I have my three-legged stool of political activism. The center one I'm always going to put is grassroots. That's you guys out there knocking doors, making phone calls, writing letters, doing the legwork, and building those relationships at the local level, talking to your state reps, talking to your local mayors, talking to everybody you can talk to. You represent people too, not just them. You are elected officials yourselves. You feel empowered to call on them when you have a problem at the local level, and start building a habit of our membership at the rank and file level of writing letters. I need RRB funding because I'd like to at some point log in, to my account without having to wait 2 weeks for a password in the mail. Stuff like that. This is democracy at the end of the day. So, and on that note, when we were running the Amtrak funding campaign last year, we did I was really, really, really happy with the turnout, the number of letters that were generated. With 10,000 emails sent to Congress through our little tool. And that's not even counting the handwritten letters and the phone calls that our folks made out in the field. Seriously, just an absolutely great job. The second part of this stool is the PAC world. Unfortunately, campaigns cost money. We have to help fund them if we are going to have a voice up there. Now, because we're in a union, that gives us a big leg up. We have the ability to organize folks and speak as one. And that also translates into the political world. We speak as one through our PAC. That gets us a foot in the door with members of Congress that we maybe never met before. Don't know us, we don't have an existing relationship per se. But you cut a little bit of money here or there because we, talk to another union, they say they're cool, bada bing, bada boom. All of a sudden he's a co-sponsor on a bill of ours. He's signing letters for us, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is how this stuff works. That is our hammer as well. And then the last part is the advocacy. That's Billy and I on Capitol Hill. That's you all when you come to DC. All of that means TCU members winning at the end of the day. Which brings me to some of the stuff going on in the states. There are a lot of things going on, and I don't have enough slide time to kind of go into all of them. So I try to kind of break some of them out a little bit. Take a look at what's going on in Democratic controlled states. We've got a pushback against confidentiality and forced arbitration agreements going on in California, Illinois, expanding voter rights by authorizing federal funds for ballot drop boxes, et cetera, expanding public sector collective bargaining rights after Janus came and, emanated from that state in the first place. In Jersey, they're expanding Buy American laws. That's great for, our folks that build rail cars, and the machinists especially that build everything. Expanding voting rights as well. Oregon, they're expanding their state OSHA to give them more authority to go after crappy employers, versus in the Republican controlled states. I mean, we've got a tax on payroll reductions and union dues in several states, actually. I was about to type that in and I apparently forgot, but I know it's going on in Florida. I believe it's going on in Montana, and Kansas as well. Anywhere where Republicans hold the trifecta, the House, Senate, and the governorship, they're ramming things through. One of the worst things that's going on in the wake of President Biden's win is these voter suppression bills. Republicans didn't like that they lost. So now they are going to try to change the rules of the elections. That is what this is about. It has nothing to do with voter fraud. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was no voter fraud on a mass scale by any means. I don't know how many lawyers and investigations have to go into this to convince people of that. But basically, Republicans in these states are just sad that they lost, and now they want to change the rules of the game to make it even harder for Democrats to ever win again. I mean, that's what we saw now going on in Georgia. Unless you guys have been living under a rock, you must have seen what's going on in Georgia. They just made it illegal to give someone water that's standing in line in a line to vote in Georgia. If you give them water, that's a misdemeanor. I mean, you can't make this shit up. It's so bad that even the corporate, the Republican friendly, usually Republican friendly corporations are throwing their hands up. I just saw the anti-union Delta CEO is out there hammering the Georgia law is completely ridiculous and based on a lie. This is bad. This is going to make it eminently harder for workers to go out and organize during political campaigns. It's going to make it harder for our members to vote at the end of the day. You guys know how hard we all worked in this last election, how hard it was to get people out to vote. We're just going to make it harder. It's very sad. And Georgia passed that bill last week, and we've got Florida, Missouri, Kansas, and Texas. They're right on their heels trying to do the same exact stuff. It's very shameful. I'm sorry I get a little bit heated about that because it's one of the worst things going on in America. We also got things like anti-protest legislation going through in Missouri and Florida. I mean, if you're in a labor union, one of your biggest ways of pushing back against your boss is to go picket. Even if you're not striking, you can go picket, or you can picket on someone else's property. I mean, this is, you can't make this stuff up. In Kentucky, the Republican legislature, there's a Democrat in the governorship, but the legislature is passing all kinds of awful anti-worker bills, like one that would literally restrict the state OSHA from doing anything that anything more than what the federal level. It's basically trying to use the minimum wage argument, but for OSHA. No, we want to keep OSHA below the federal level. That doesn't make any sense. The governor vetoed that. They want to cut public education funding, and the governor's vetoing that. These are things going on in your states, guys. We would love for you guys to get active in trying to push back or push to support some of this stuff. Case in point, one of the things that we thought was going to happen right after the election, and we saw that what happened in Montana, where Republicans won House and Senate and the governorship in Montana. We said, oh, well, there goes another right to work state. Well, workers organized, and they stormed the Capitol up there, but in a good way. They showed up to protest peacefully and made themselves known that they were completely against this right to work bill. And guess what? They convinced 30 Republicans, I believe, to join all of the Democrats to kill it in the House. I mean, that's massive. That's huge. And we just thought it was a foregone conclusion. We're like, well, another right to work state, we're screwed. But that's what you can do. That's what happens when everybody stands up. And Billy and I were on a call with Senator Tester that day. And we had a bunch of the IBEW guys, was on a Zoom, and the IBEW guys were so pumped. They were like, well, we're going to get our cars. We're going to drive to New Hampshire, where there's another right to work thing going on. I mean, this is the stuff that changes our destinies, guys.
Everything you heard here today is why Dave and I wanted to have this Zoom meeting. We want to show you how important it is to have a strong legislative department, how a strong legislative department is to the strength of our union and the improvement of our members' lives. We'd like you to support a few things so that we could be successful as a union. I want you to spread on the property what you learned here today. Become the conduit for your local on political information, political truths and consequences. And the misinformation that circulates around that can be answered with facts. We're going to have a link to the Zoom for when we're done. So if any of you guys want to show it to your members, just click the link and, you know, you could fast forward and do whatever you want to do. But you could show it to your members to show them just how important to be active legislatively is. And, you know, I want to end with MMPL. Only 10% of our members contribute anything to MMPL. We don't ask for a lot. A couple dollars a month, a cup of coffee, a Starbucks lotto, whatever they call them. You know, it's not too much to protect your livelihood and protect having a dignified retirement. So when you get back to your property, I know it's, you know, I've been around too. I know it's not an easy thing, but you have to have a conversation with some of the guys that you work with and see what you could do about getting an increase in the number of people contributing to MMPL. It's not a lot of money. So, and somebody you should focus on, which is like, I don't want to call it easy, but it's easier. Every time you get a new employee and they're filling out their union application, the membership form, one of those pages is an MMPL form. You should be hitting them up for $5, $2, $3. It's an easy one. They're all so happy to have the job, and they should be happy to cough up a couple dollars. So you got to remember, the job they get is because of our union. The benefits they get is because of our union. The rate of pay they get is because of our union. And if they think they'd get those things without our union, they're dreaming. And you got to put that into their head. So let's make our union as strong as we can. All we need is strong solidarity and a strong political department. We have both, but we could be better. Thank you, brothers and sisters. I really appreciate you spending the time with us. And Artie, I'll turn it over to you to close it out.
All right, again, thank you, everybody. If you think of a question later on, email Dave or Billy or give him a call. But again, we're going to do this bi-monthly, and the invite will go out. If members want to come on, that's fine. Local officers, I really want to push for that, because the more people that hear information and get it out there, the better.